Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and I do hope that you're doing remarkably well and that you've got that lovely hot cup of cocoa or coffee or whatever it is that you want to drink, because I've got the most fabulous story for you tonight. So before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners. My name is Doreen and I'm from Washington State in the Pacific Northwest, but I'm originally from Calgary in Canada. My family moved to North America when I was about 10 years old. We settled in Northwest Washington along the Potomac River in the 70s, and so invariably my memories of my life in Canada are pretty vague. I was raised in the historic area of Georgetown of Columbia County, which was a thriving port community in 1752. Georgetown is tightly compact, a neighbourhood steeped in its historic roots, with 18th to 19th century federal-style architecture and quirky little cobblestone streets. This spectacular, awe-inspiring area is surrounded by green spaces and pretty verdant parks. I really love the canal that extends 185 miles into the Cumberland, Maryland, through a series of pretty locks. I grew up in a quintessential renovated Victorian house here in Georgetown with my younger sister Diane and both my parents, and all this time I lived about one street away from my husband-to-be, and yet in those days we never ever crossed paths, not even once. I met my husband Gabriel on a perfectly clear sunny day that in an instant darkened, and suddenly the clouds burst open and it began to rain heavily. It would seem that the cotton dress that I was wearing was completely soaked, and my drenched hair was hanging in rat's tails around my face. I began rushing home from my walk in the park, with my little Boston Terrier, Toya, feeling very exposed as we were caught up in the thick of this torrential onslaught. Gabriel, on witnessing my dishevelled state, stopped his car immediately and asked me if I'd like a lift. I was heartily glad to be rescued by this debonair gentleman, and hastily took him up on his offer, as Toya and I gratefully climbed into the back of his car, offloading pools of water onto his pristine white leather seats. I remember I cordially invited Gabriel in for a coffee as a way of saying thanks, and he accepted at once. I went to dry off and change my clothes, while Gabriel, using a towel, dried up Toya, my dog, and we began to talk over cups of steaming hot coffee. After our serendipitous encounter, we would meet up fairly regularly to walk our dogs in the park every single day. At that time he had a mischievous beagle called Tommy, who loved to lift his leg up on everything. Gabes and I would enjoy walking and talking together, and so began the beginning of our magical love story. We were married in a very enchanting small Baroque chapel in Georgetown in 1991, and then we moved into a really delightful old Victorian home, only about 3 blocks away from where I originally grew up as a young girl. My strange, incredulous story that ultimately led to my Bigfoot encounter all began with a rather novel, unconventional dinner party, and it was one I was not going to forget in a hurry. And it is a story Gabe still teases me about today incessantly, as it is forever marked in our memories with vivid recall and much humour. Gabriel is half Swedish, and so he'd started up a brand new company here in Georgetown, where he was introducing Swedish prefabricated self-assembly wooden sheds, chicken coops, tree houses, barns, and even small houses that were delivered to our customers in very large cardboard containers. It would seem that our aspiring, innovative business idea was going remarkably well. One day Gabriel informed me that he'd like to invite the CEO and his wife from the company headquarters in Sweden over for a celebratory, illustrious dinner party. He wanted to make an eminent impression on them both and emphatically believed that I would wow them with my culinary prowess and my charm. I wanted our important dinner guests to see how serious we both were about this business enterprise of ours, and to readily discern that we were the perfect couple to run the entire company from the ground up on the American side of things, and that we had an ardent passion, enthusiasm, energy and dedication second to none. So there I was, agreeing to prepare an exceptionally glamorous, well-presented dinner party for our highly esteemed guests. I resourcefully decided upon the practicalities of planning an ingenious but delicious home-style menu, and laying on a sumptuous spread. I was going to cook some of the 80s American favourites at the time, and introduce the Swedish couple to chicken and mushroom vol au vents for hors d'oeuvres, followed by beef stroganoff with roast potatoes for the main course, And then, of course, plum torte served with homemade vanilla ice cream for dessert. I would swathe my dining room table with the finest resplendent golden tablecloths and matching napkins, while showcasing my finest gold-rimmed bone china dishes, sparkling crystal glassware, and silver cutlery. I would deck the table with lavish ornate silver candlesticks filled with swanky gold candles, and then I would fill the small crystal vases with an assortment of pretty rosebuds, from lilacs to pinks and creams. I'd even gone off shopping in Georgetown to my favourite bohemian boutique to buy the quintessential rather zooty black dress with a slinky pair of high heels to match, and I knew I looked pretty good in my dashing ensemble, even if I say so myself. Now, if that wasn't enough, I'd even booked an appointment at the hair salon for the day in question to have my hair styled and my nails manicured with bright pink nail varnish. I was feeling galvanised with enthusiastic excitement about my first opportunity to become the quintessential domestic goddess that would make Martha Stewart look very prosaic, unoriginal, and incredibly pedestrian by contrast. I could visualise it all so perfectly in my mind's eye. My Swedish guests would be mesmerised and spellbound by my delectable, delicious food, wondering whether I'd actually studied cuisine under the guidance of Gordon Ramsay. My husband would be bursting with pride to show off his incredibly snazzy, charming and very domesticated young wife, and our dazzled, beguiled and bewitched guests would be in such awe and very certain that there was no one more worthy in North America to command and preside over their up-and-coming Swedish company than we were. I'm going to make a brutally honest confession to you and your listeners, and that is that I'm a very untidy, messy person, and it is not uncommon for me to leave trails of jumbled clothes strewn over the bedroom floor, as I spend ages trying to decide what to wear. I've been informed that this is because I'm a typical Libran, which means I'm desperately indecisive, and I admit that this is true. I also loathe cleaning up after myself, especially washing dishes, and I'm predisposed to leaving the cluttered kitchen looking like a chaotic bomb has hit it, and that's an understatement. I have to tell you that Gabriel is a very methodical, fastidious and neat person, and is often the one that cleans up after me. He doesn't understand how someone as petite as I am can make the house look as if it's been ransacked by thieves or invaded by a herd of disorderly, trampeding elephants who've clearly had a bad trunk day. On the day of the dinner party, I must have got my wires crossed with Gabriel, because I falsely believed that I was hosting this elegant dinner party the following Monday, and not on the day in question. The unorderly house looked higgledy-piggledy after the hectic weekend, and there were clothes literally carpeting the living room furniture, much like cascades of miniature throws, and there was also random garments lying strewn over the cream carpet in a kaleidoscope of bright colours. I vividly recall waking up this fateful morning with a thundering, thumping headache and the hangover from hell, as Gabriel and I had drunk rather too much Pinot Noir the previous day. It was coming back to haunt me, much like the proverbial boomerang. When I have migraine headaches, they tend to hit me with the veracity of a raging electric storm that pummels my head like a meat grinder on full throttle. I knew that this day was invariably a non-starter for me. The house was a deplorable mess, there was no food in the refrigerator, and I was incapacitated by this appalling nausea, drilling head and sensitivity to light. I knew that I would have to take it easy today and put the household chores and weekly shopping on hold. I gratefully returned back to bed and slept almost the entire day, waking up for a moment to answer a call of nature. I glanced at my dishevelled reflection in the mirror and was horrified by what I saw staring back at me. My pasty face looked whiter than a sheet, and my tousled, draggle-tailed hair stood on end like a hedgehog, and my blue eyes were contoured by the most hideous dark rims that reminded me of a raccoon. I looked a complete and total mess, but I didn't care because of my blinding, intolerable headache, and reluctantly once again I retired back to bed. When would this god-awful headache go, I wondered? I was awoken at 6 in the evening to hear the doorbell buzzing. Oh, that must be Gabriel, I thought, groaning in annoyance. Why didn't he take his keys with him to work this morning, I thought angrily. Now I had to manoeuvre my body out of bed and unlock the door. I wasn't pleased about it at all. I stumbled out of bed, looking like a very grouchy, bad-tempered bull terrier, with my sleepy eyes in slits. I proceeded to open the front door, exclaiming, "Why the heck didn't you take your keys with you this morning?" To my horror, standing in the doorway was a very well-turned-out, dashing and debonair Swedish CEO, and his very stylish, glamorous and chic wife, both whom looked like they'd stepped out of a bandbox or had spent the entire afternoon with Vogue for the launch of a very glamorous fashion shoot. While there I was, by contrast, with my wind-blown, uncombed hair, looking as if I'd been dragged through a hedge backwards, wearing a grumpy expression on my face, along with a kiddie's pair of Snoopy pyjamas. How ridiculous did I look! I've never felt more self-conscious, humiliated and embarrassed in my entire life, as I ushered my bemused, bewildered guest into the living room, trying to smooth down my hair in the process, and dashing around the living area like a bat out of hell, trying to pick up all the bedraggled clothes and stuffing them all into the hall cupboard as quickly as I could to make the place look less like a boudoir and more like a living room. "Oh, I'm so sorry," said the lady. "Have we arrived at an inconvenient time for you?" she said, looking at me awkwardly, still in my pyjamas. "Oh, of course not," I lied. "I've been looking so forward to seeing you both all day. I'm just a tad disorganised, that's all." "Well, don't worry about us," she said. "We don't stand on ceremony here. We're very relaxed," she assured me. "Well, may I say you look incredibly lovely," I said. "You look like you're about to attend a dinner invite at Buckingham Palace, not a simple dinner here in Georgetown with us." "Oh, this old thing," she said, looking down at her exquisite red flowing dress. "Oh, I've had it for years. It's nothing special at all." The woman then moved towards me and kissed me on both of my cheeks, handing me a massive exquisite bouquet of very expensive flowers and 2 bottles of the finest French champagne. "Thank you," I said. "That's very, very naughty of you. They're incredibly beautiful. Gabriel, please give our guests something to drink," I said, "and put those lovely flowers in a vase, won't you? I'll be back in a tick." I raced into my bedroom as quickly as I could to brush my hair and throw on my black dress and a splash of red lipstick to make myself look halfway decent. I suddenly realised that the shock of seeing my guests on the doorstep had seemingly obliterated my headache, which had to be a good thing. I retreated to the kitchen where Gabriel was pouring out glasses of champagne for our guests. "What the hell happened to you today?" he asked me, looking mortified. "The house looked like it'd been hit by a tornado, and you look like you've been tossed in the eye of the storm." "I know," I said. "I didn't know the dinner party was today. What am I going to feed them? I've not got anything in the house at all," I said, opening the refrigerator and beginning to groan. "Oh, no." "I'm sure you can rustle up something," said my husband. "I have full faith in your culinary prowess, and if the worst comes to the worst, I'll order takeout for all of us." "I'm sure our guests won't mind," he said at all, giving me a big wink and planting an encouraging big kiss on my forehead. "Oh, by the way," he said teasingly, "you still look beautiful, despite the fact that you do look as if you have been ruffled up rather a lot." "Always quite the charmer," I said, giggling. I scanned the contents of the refrigerator and sighed all the more. Oh, no! I could see that all I had was a cheese, milk and a few bedraggled pieces of salad. I decided I'd make some macaroni cheese for dinner, and I managed to whiz up some frozen raspberries which I mixed with champagne to make a fruit coulis, which I served with tinned peaches and vanilla ice cream, and actually it really was rather good. You would never have guessed that those peaches were actually tinned. It's amazing what you can rustle up if you actually put your mind to it. Before long we were all seated at my mahogany dining room table, eating macaroni cheese, and my guest complimented me on my melt-in-the-mouth dish, saying it was the best mac and cheese that they'd ever tasted, and it seemed that I had redeemed myself somewhat. I have to admit it was delicious, so miracles do happen when we least expect them to. As our guests relaxed, we began to lose our inhibitions, especially after drinking lots of champagne, and we began to talk as if we'd known each other all our lives, and the formality and reserve dissipated, and so did the need to impress our guests. It seemed that the lovely Swedish lady called Astrid and her husband Lucas had been all around Washington State and remarked on the incredible beauty of the Pacific Northwest. "You live in a very beautiful part of the world," they stressed. "Do you realise how lucky you are?" "I think we do," I said, "but I must admit it's very easy sometimes to take things for granted here." It seemed that our Swedish guests had visited many interesting places, and they told us that they'd camped at Mount Rainier over a couple of days and had a wonderful time there. "Oh," I agreed, "that is indeed the most beautiful place. Gabriel and I have been there once or twice, And we've lived here all our life. It's pathetic that we haven't been there more often. You do know Mount Rainier is the highest volcanic peak bordering the United States and the largest alpine glacier outside of Alaska. Oh, I know that, said Astrid, but I understand it's also an active volcano in the Cascades that hasn't erupted in the last 460 years or so. That's right, I said, but even though it's potentially dangerous, isn't it absolutely glorious? Oh, yes, I was absolutely awestruck by how stunning it was. The trail was also magnificent, with waterfalls, streams, mountainous outcrops and silvery lakes, and the most gorgeous meadows of wild flowers with butterflies and bees everywhere. It was utterly enchanting. I was totally gobsmacked by how beautiful everything was. Astrid turned to her husband and said, "Shall we tell them what we saw, dear?" "Why not?" said Lucas. "But it is an incredulous, rather outlandish story, I'm afraid, that you might find rather difficult to believe. So we won't be offended if you're sceptical about what we tell you. As if we were wearing your shoes, we wouldn't believe it either." "What did you see?" I asked, looking intrigued. "We saw a strange kind of primate." "What?" I said. "But we don't get primates here in North America, unless one escaped from the zoo, and that is very unlikely." "Well, let me tell you the story," said Astrid. "Lucas and I spent our first night in a tent at Mount Rainier and decided to get up really early before even the sun had come out to start our hike that day. It meant that we could make fast progress and get a lot of walking under our belts before the sun actually rose. It seemed like a really good idea for us, as during the middle of the day it can get unpleasantly hot. So we arose at about 4:30. "Boy, that is early," I said. "It was, I know, but really worth all the effort. We wore headlamps and armed ourselves with flashlight and provisions. Actually, it was really rather lovely so early in the morning. Before long, the sun rose over the valley, and you could see the golden yellow of the sun enveloping the blue sky and casting its pretty shafts of light over the silvery lake that reflected all the alpine trees, creating a golden glaze on its sparkly surfaces. After a while, it was almost like a switch had been flicked because the birds began to tweet and everything seemed to come so vibrantly alive with the orchestral sounds of the dawn chorus. We saw more wildlife than we'd beheld the previous day, possibly because it was so early in the morning. We noted a couple of chipmunks, 2 raccoons, squirrels and black-tailed deers. It was like while all the campers at Mount Rainier were fast asleep in their beds, it had become a bustling hive of activity very early in the morning. Suddenly we sighted a really striking red fox with a gloriously resplendent red coat and a puffed-up tail. Its back was turned away from us, and it wasn't physically aware of our presence. That was when I indicated to Lucas in hushed tones and sign language to creep behind a large evergreen conifer so we could get a close view of the fox. We could see him just sitting down in the middle of the path, staring ahead of him, and then he began to sniff the air. For a while it seemed that he had smelt something on the wind that unsettled him, and then he bolted away as fast as he could, as if something had really ruffled his feathers. All of a sudden we were hit with this overpowering smell that was very acrid, like ammonia or nail varnish remover, and it burnt the back of our throats and stung our eyes. I was just about to say, "What the heck is that?" to Lucas, when I suddenly heard this loud thumping sound. Whatever it was causing the ground to shake, wobble and reverberate. It sounded like something hefty was gallumping towards us, like a trumpeding elephant. I do not know how to say this to you, but when I heard that noise, I knew that whatever was coming our way was colossal and exceedingly dangerous. You could feel the presence before you actually saw it. I know that sounds outlandish and crazy, but that is what it was like. And then we saw these 2 Herculean-sized creatures coming into our field of vision, and when I saw them, I was transfixed with shock, and I nearly passed out. I've never felt so lappified in all my life as I froze up and broke out into a cold sweat. I began to shake and shiver, and my hair was standing on edge. It was like my heart had jumped into my throat. "It was terrifying," said Lucas, intervening. "I mean, I've never been more spooked or dumbfounded by anything in my entire life. These things were gargantuan, weren't they, dear?" "Oh," said Astrid, "words fail me to describe the size of these things. I think they were easily 10 to 11 foot tall, 900 to 1,000 pounds, and as wide as your front door easily. I was just so amazed that anything that large could stand upright on 2 legs with such agility, grace and dexterity. The critters looked like primates, but they also had human qualities to their appearance, especially in the finer features of their faces. Their intelligent expressions and the general body shape, but on a much larger scale, of course, were very human-like. They were covered in long flowing dark brown hair that was flecked with an auburn tint, and they had powerful sturdy legs and very overlong arms. What would you say that their faces looked like? I asked. Well, I'd say they were quite human-like in a way, very, very expressive, but different at the same time. It's really rather hard to explain. They had dome-shaped heads that folded into the shoulders pretty seamlessly. I didn't actually discern a neck to speak of. The faces were wide but very long, and the noses exceptionally flat, and the mouth very big but thin, and the eyes deep-set and dark. What exactly were they doing? I asked. Well, this is where it gets rather odd. These two critters were actually arguing, much like humans do. You could tell by the maddened tone of their excitable voices, and the way that they were looking at each other with eyes that could kill like angry daggers. They kept pointing fingers at each other indignantly, in an accusatory way like you or I might do if we were blaming someone for something. I could sense that they were both squabbling, and they kept quarrelling in this strange language, speaking backwards and forwards over and over again. Sometimes they even interrupted each other. Then one critter lunged towards the other and began tugging furiously at something that was in the other critter's hands. I realised immediately that they were fighting over a dead chipmunk. We watched in awe as the critter with the chipmunk sat under a tree against the trunk to eat his chipmunk, while his friend drooled as he watched him chewing every mouthful. He looked so tortured, and it was like he was hanging around for some crumbs or hoping in the off chance that the critter might concede and give him a bite, but that didn't look as if it was likely to happen. That was when Astrid did something rarely mad, said Lucas, interrupting. My wife has a mushy heart. Sometimes she can't help herself, even to her own peril, it would seem. What did you do? I asked. Well, in my rucksack I just happened to have a large bunch of bananas, would you believe? I'd brought it to snack on, and so I slid the bananas along the ground very stealthily, as quietly as I could, where they landed several feet away from the critter. I thought she'd blown our cover, said Lucas, but she hadn't, because it was like the empty-handed critter just began to sniff the air. It was as if he could smell something suddenly. And that was when his eyes glanced down upon the bananas, and he rushed over and grabbed them. He began to dance jubilantly and make whooping sounds. Woo, whoop, whoop, whoop. It was like that. I tell you, his reaction was like a kid at Christmas opening his dream gift. I've never seen anything so happy. He was over the moon and swinging the bananas backwards and forwards, literally doing his best to get the other critter's attention, as if to say, look what I've got, and it's all mine. The critter eating the chipmunk stopped very suddenly. He looked up at the critter with an astounded expression on his face, as if to say, where did you get those from? This time he was the one that was drooling. So that was very funny. He began to offer his chipmunk to the critter in exchange for just one banana. The critter with the banana gave him one banana for the dead chipmunk and sat in the corner eating the rest of the bananas along with the dead chipmunk. He looked like the cat that had got the cream because he'd rarely scored. He was in heaven. We watched those human critters for a while, and then we heard the voices of hikers coming down the trail, and those things were gone like greased lightning. I was so gutted. They didn't want to be anywhere near the humans. Oh, but at least we got to see them, I suppose. I wonder what you saw, though, I said. So do we, said Lucas. I'd really love to know. Do you believe us? He asked. Of course I believe you, I said. I'm glad to tell you that despite the Snoopy pyjamas, bedraggled hair, messy home and pretty basic food that we offered our guests, we became great and firm friends with Lucas and Astrid over the years. I gather that they were as nervous about meeting us as we were about meeting them, and me appearing in my pyjamas rarely helped her to relax. We were very lucky that we were successfully able to take charge of the Scandinavian part of the business on the American side, with a great deal of success, I might add. Fast forward to about 2007, and then I had long since forgotten Astrid and Lucas's story by then, about the critters that they'd encountered at Mount Rainier National Park. At the time I was training for a marathon, and I cannot abide going to a gym and running on a treadmill staring at a white wall, That just isn't for me. So I'd get up early and go running around a local park here in Washington that is full of western hemlocks and ponderosa pines and Douglas firs and spruce trees, and it has lots of walking, running and hiking trails. And so one day as I was running up a hiking path, I was hit by a pine cone, and it stopped me dead in my tracks, because I knew that the pine cone had not just dropped from the tree, but had been deliberately targeted at me. There was no one on the hiking trail, and I was flummoxed. Then another pine cone came flying at me, hitting me directly on the shoulders. I turned around and looked absolutely everywhere, and yet I saw nothing, and was exceedingly perturbed. And then again I was hit by another flying pine cone, and this time it was on the leg. And then I heard what I can only describe as muffled laughter, almost as if someone was trying to block their laughter and suppress it, but they were clearly laughing at me. "That's not funny," I shouted. "I know you're there." And then that was when I saw a black shadow peeping at me through the tree line, so I ran around the corner to get a better view. And that was when I saw the creature that Astrid and Lucas had described to me years earlier, only this one was auburn in colour, and looked at me with these very amused golden eyes. Despite its good humour and seemingly docile nature, I was so stunned by what I was seeing that I literally froze to the spot and just stared at the creature with a look of complete bewilderment on my face. The critter threw one more cone at me, laughed again, and then glided away into the woods and was gone from my sight. I went home and was trembling so much it took me ages to compose myself. Gabriel said to me, "What on earth is the matter with you? You look as if you've seen a ghost." I remember saying to him, "It may well have been a ghost, for I have no idea what I saw." Fast forward to about 2005, and my husband and I were relaxing watching a television programme together all about mysteries in North America. Someone had drawn a picture of a Sasquatch that they had seen, and I said to Gabriel that this is what I had seen that day when I went running in the woods, and that is what I believe that Astrid and Lucas must have seen at Mount Rainier National Park. It was Bigfoot. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, what an incredible story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.